Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan and Maury and Kristen. That was a really excellent paper. I'm not an international economist, but I thought that's likely to help me think through these issues, which is very good. We now have another panel coming up. The next panel is what does full employment look like for your community and constituency? And it's now my pleasure to introduce our next moderator, Lael Brainerd, who has been a member of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System since 2014. Prior to her appointment to the board, Governor Brainerd served as Undersecretary of the U.S. Department of Treasury from 2010 to 2013 and counselor to the Secretary of the Treasury in 2009. She has held the Bernard L. Schwartz Chair at the Brookings Institution, and she also served as the Deputy National Economic Advisor and Deputy Assistant to President Clinton. Prior to this, Governor Brainerd was an Associate Professor of Applied Economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Sloan School of Management. She's published numerous articles on a variety of economic topics and is the editor or co-editor of several books. Governor Brainerd received a BA with University Honors from Wesleyan University. She received an MS and PhD in economics in 1989 from Harvard University, where she was awarded a National Science Foundation Fellowship. Welcome, Governor Brainerd. The floor is yours.
So we are now going to take the conversation that we've been having all day and bring it back down to what are people experiencing in communities all around the country in today's economy, and how does it compare with where the economy was maybe 10 years ago. And this is connecting the conversations here in Chicago with a series of conversations that all of our reserve banks have been hosting all around the country with folks who are in the workplace every day, whether they be small businesses, community organizations, or employees. And so we just wanted to bring some of that here to this conference in Chicago as well. So to do that, we've got three wonderful panelists. I'm going to turn the floor over to each of you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll jump in with some questions. So Duke, I want to start with you.
Thank you. My name's Duke. My actual name's Pat Diakovich, but no one on the fire department could say that, so they went ahead and named me Duke. I'm the president of the Greater Kansas City AFL-CIO. We represent organized working members throughout. I, of course, did 30 years on the fire department in Kansas City and have since retired from there.
Hello, I'm Juan Salgado. I'm the Chancellor of the City Colleges of Chicago. We are a 7-college system comprised of 80,000 students, 75% African American and Latino, overwhelmingly lower income students that are looking for upward mobility, half of whom are transferring off upon graduation, half of whom are going right into the workforce. And say a little bit more about our students, but the one thing that you should take away is if you're not hiring one of our students, you are missing out on an opportunity, okay? Because our students, despite everything they have to go through to persist through education, right, do so. And so they have the grit, the determination, the maturity, and the skills to contribute to work environments all across our city, all across our country.
Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy Van Clunen. I'm the CEO of National Skills Coalition, which is a workforce policy organization based in Washington. And we were created by a set of stakeholders who in communities all around the country are trying to figure out how to move more people, particularly those who are kind of on the margins of the labor market, into skilled, better paying jobs. So these are labor leaders, business leaders, community colleges, community organizations, workforce boards, other folks that are trying to figure out how to match people to those jobs and to figure out what training investments we could be making, particularly from federal and state programs, to make that more effective. And the things that they've identified as the challenges that where they think that the policy conversation has kind of been lacking up until now is we do not talk enough about the plurality of jobs in most any community that are going to require some kind of substantial training past high school, but not necessarily a 4-year degree. We do a lot of work on trying to make it easier for folks, not as much as we should, but at least we do have some attention paid to how it is we can get more people to a college degree, but not much for that middle skilled worker who is looking for an opportunity in those jobs. And we don't tend to talk about a lot of folks who are already in the labor market, including 2/3 of U.S. workers who will never pursue a college degree. 40 million of those workers, as mentioned earlier, who have limited reading or math or English language or digital literacy skills, which would make it a challenge to kind of get them retrained to kind of take one of the better paying jobs in their communities. And for most workers who unfortunately are not at a company that is investing in their training. So the private sector spends a great deal of money on the training of its workforce, but it tends to be focused on folks who have at least a college degree, at least some college experience. So what is it that we could be doing from the government side to work with industry to get more investment into those folks who don't have that college degree, but we think are just as worthy of getting some investment in their human capital to help them advance?
Great. So I think we'll start where we left off earlier with Catherine's paper and Lisa and Jared's panel. As you know, we are trying to figure out a more nuanced view of the labor market rather than a single metric, a single unemployment statistic. And I think what would be very helpful to us is to hear from you. When we have a strong labor market like we do today, how does that show up in the experience of the people that you work with in your communities? What does a strong labor market look like?
And to give you an answer for that, first of all, you have to understand what my constituents look like. The AFL-CIO in Kansas City, we represent a wide, diverse group of people. We represent teachers and firefighters and iron workers and electricians and letter carriers. We represent janitors. And no offense to the brother from Boston, but we represent the greatest NFL quarterback in history, Patrick Mahomes. So Mahomes is a member of the Kansas City AFL-CIO. So we've got a very diverse group. We have some that are upper middle class and upper middle class, but the majority of them are working people, and they go to work and they just try, like everyone else, to be productive, to save a little bit of money, to try to dream of retirement and sending their kids to college. That's what they really want. And more, the decisions that we're seeing coming out, we need things that give a sense of security. I have heard about price stability and fiscal sustainability through the Fed for a very, very long time. And maybe I wasn't listening, but today's the first time I heard employment stability and employment security. The part of the country I'm in, Kansas City, Missouri, there's a Ford plant. The largest automobile manufacturing plant in the United States is there. They build the F-150 and the Transit. A couple of years ago, the F-150 went to an aluminum body, and then talk of tariffs came in, and continued discussion about tariffs have really rocked that market. There's also a General Motors plant there, and that one's also suffered. And there's insecurity throughout. And until last Friday, we had a Harley-Davidson plant. We lost 800 jobs last Friday. And so more and more, when we get a tight labor market, that's fantastic. But we're starting to look at sustainability. And I hate to be, the kid who got what he asked for and then comes back and wants more. It's great we've got jobs. We really like that. And that's fantastic for the people that I work with. But we need to make sure that we've got some sustainability in that.
Juan, how about you? So how much are your graduates finding that the job market is really strong, and are they finding jobs that are more secure, better paid?
We're living through a very interesting period, and welcome to our city, by the way, to Chicago and lifelong Chicagoan. But at the same time that we're seeing lots of economic growth in our city, and quite frankly, many, many companies coming to City College of Chicago looking for new and better solutions to their human resources challenges. You wouldn't have thought, 2 years, I've only been chancellor for the last 2 years. One of my first conversations was the manager of Accenture's Midwest office. At the time, he had 3 or 4 interns from City College. I was quite pleased with them, right? And one of the things we were able to do over the last 2 years is transform a very loose internship program into a very robust apprenticeship program. To the degree now that you take an institution like Accenture, who had never hired associate's degree earners, who has now created an initiative where we are likely very soon to become the single largest source of entry-level talent for the Accenture Midwest office. They've taken on 27 apprentices. They're going to hire most of those students. They found roles in their institution where our students that are close to graduating could add value. And we're doing that sort of company by company. And so it's opening up doors. And for an institution like ours, you have to know something that is pretty sad, I would say, right? Because many of the institutions for higher level occupations have not traditionally hired from us. They've bypassed us for four-year universities. And so this market is creating opportunities for new conversations, new possibilities. And I don't think they're temporary. I think that what these companies are looking for are solutions that are going to help them with their overall bottom line, but also with their environment. Because what we're hearing from employers is, look, our students don't come with, look, they've had to work for every little thing they've gotten, okay? And as a result of that, they're bringing something additive to the work environment that complements the other workers that these institutions have. So at the same time, let me just tell you, 2 years ago, when I started, I looked at unemployment in the areas where our colleges were, okay? And so while we have this opportunity, we have in Inglewood, near Kennedy King, 6,000 people that live there, 95% African American, 58% with a household income less than $25,000, 85% without a college degree, 35% unemployed, and 47% not in the labor force. Okay, so when I hear, we're at full employment, that's not my reality. That's not our community's reality. And look, I'm not going to go down the line, but I can go down the line to Olive Harvey and Daly College and Malcolm X College and around our colleges, and I can share similar statistics in a city that is vibrant and growing. And I don't want anybody to read into those statistics. These are people with incredible capabilities and incredible talents and incredible possibilities that can, in fact, stick in the labor market for some time to come, all right? And if you don't believe that, just come on by City Colleges of Chicago, okay? I have an open invitation to me, and I will tell you within 5 minutes, you'll realize that what I'm telling you about these students is absolutely spot on, 100%.
So, Andy, do you want to kind of continue on that path and just how do the market for middle skill occupations look right now? Are employers trying harder? Are they willing to invest more in their workers?
Well, I think, to a point that was made earlier, Jared had made the point. I mean, there are a lot of companies that are so short workers that they are now considering to hire people who probably would not have been their typical applicant. So that's good news in terms of that person who was not employed is now finding a job. That doesn't mean that once they've been hired that they're necessarily going to be staying in that job. A company who's hiring somebody that they're not sure if they're fully qualified is probably not going to be putting a lot of money and time into that individual. They're expecting some level of turnover and attrition. I think that what has been an interesting development, Juan mentioned about apprenticeship at Accenture, like who would think that Accenture would have an apprenticeship program? This is something that is actually because of the tight labor market, where companies have said, yes, we know that we're hiring folks who are probably not fully qualified. Is there at least a way that we could kind of enter into a relationship, whether it's with a labor union or a community college or somebody else, where it is that we can kind of get that person into the job, recognizing that they're not fully ready to do the job now, but kind of over time invest in their skills, hopefully with some wage progression so that they actually are going to be part of the long-term workforce here at our company. So that's really encouraging. The challenge is that it's been somewhat, it is slow to scale. So we've got obviously long-term tradition in the construction industry, in the manufacturing sector, but insurance, financial services, healthcare, a number of other industries where it really is kind of slow to get on board. I think that the other challenge is that the distinction between what large firms are ready to do and what small firms are capable of doing. We work with a lot of smaller companies who would like to invest in that new hire, but are looking for a potential like a government co-investor, like somebody who can kind of work with them to figure out how to do that. We don't prioritize incumbent worker training in this country. We actually put limits on what you can do with, say, federal labor programs in terms of what you can invest in people who are currently on the job. We figure that box has been checked as opposed to getting somebody into a new job. And so trying to figure out where it is that you could develop a more effective partnership between government and local, particularly local smaller companies, seems to be a key part of the solution. I would say short of that, the other thing is we just need to figure out how to make it easier for companies to work with each other. So a lot of the smaller companies that we work with have kind of figured out that hiring the qualified person from my competitor down the road, it's good for that worker. It increases they're going to get an increase in their wages. It's not good for the local industry because we're just kind of moving folks around. So is there a way that we could develop a partnership across companies within the same industry or sector? This is something that other countries it's kind of like a matter of course of how it is they think about organizing the labor market. It's something that industry has started to do a little bit on our own, and we've given some support for it from the federal level. The states actually have figured this out, that a policy that can bring companies together as an industry will be able to leverage their private investment and supplement it with some public investment, that we actually could be improving advancement for a lot more of those workers than if we were just doing it on a firm-by-firm basis.
So I wanted to get an employer perspective. I think, Holly, you've been working with the NFIB. Can you talk a little bit about that? We heard it called this morning recruiting intensity. How are companies now trying to find those workers in today's strong labor market?
Certainly. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this great discussion. NFIB has been surveying our hundreds of thousands of members since 1973, asking a number of questions related to employment. Over the last several months, we've seen record level recordings of business owners that have job openings that are currently unable to fill, hiring plans, but also compensation increases. And compensation, we don't distinguish between wages and benefits, so some of that is competing with the rising cost of health insurance and things like that as a compensation package. But they're certainly trying to recruit and retain their employees. We've found that they're looking to adjust how they've previously recruited for open positions. And one way is that about a quarter of them have lowered their minimum qualifications for both most skilled and lesser skilled, most common positions to fill those roles and increase their in-house training programs. One of the biggest hurdles that they have, though, when they are increasing their training programs and diverting more time and attention to those areas, is that there's competition obviously out there for them to go to other companies. So turnover is certainly a problem. But the small business sector is strong and healthy, and they're trying to navigate the tight labor market as much as possible. But those are some of the challenges that they're facing.
Okay, thank you. So I think it might be helpful. I think we got a sense that this period with strong labor demand is particularly important for workers at the lower end of the skill spectrum, for low and moderate income households. Can you focus a little bit specifically on the most vulnerable households and how this is changing prospects for them?
Well, for people who are vulnerable, and it's a real challenge for them to get into the workforce, this is a great time. So as you've heard, there are a lot of prerequisites that are being waived. You need 3 years experience, 5 years experience, that's gone. Anybody who can drive a truck, we can probably get you working today. And that's one of the really big jobs out there, is if you can get a CDL, especially a Class A CDL. But if you can just get a CDL and drive a delivery truck or a van and you're licensed to do that, you can go to work. And then there's, of course, the poaching. And if you look on the back of a lot of trucks, you will see an ad to come drive with us. And so who do you think they're targeting? They're not targeting you guys. They're targeting somebody else stuck in traffic driving a different truck. Some of them have started putting their starting salary on the back of them. And when you think about how big that market is, I mean, everything from trash removal and dumpsters to all of the produce and deliveries that happen every single day. And then, I don't know what the number is, but they used to send pallets of laundry detergent to a grocery store, and now they're carrying bottles to everybody's house. That's just really driving this thing, and it's driving it really bad. I wish I wasn't so skeptical, but when I keep hearing about the 5G network and the need for self-driving cars, I don't think they're talking about passenger vehicles. I think they're trying to plan a way to get these trucks to run up and down the highway on their own. And I think that's a really big thing. Well, one of the great things about, in addition to the prerequisites being gone, looking the other way on some past mistakes, for the most part, the majority of the unions that I know of, if you made a mistake and you paid your price and you didn't hurt a child or spousal abuse or any of that, you can come to work. Now, you may not pass the background check to work in this building for construction, but you can go work somewhere else and you can get over that. They're really looking the other way on that now. Some of the states have quit testing for marijuana on their drug test. The drug test is another big deal because some places still have safety sensitive or DOT physicals that include a drug test that they have to have. So you have that. But one of the parts about the current tight labor market for the people who are most at risk. So take a single mother. She's out there. She's getting $15 an hour somewhere. She's working. She's doing great. We all just went through that polar vortex. Kids get sick. Somebody's got to leave work. $15 an hour. She has to leave, get the kid out of daycare because the kid's sick. That's $60. Take him to the doctor, $20 copay, $20 prescription. You're up pushing $100, and then not enough time to cook for the other kids, and so stop at McDonald's and buy something to feed them. And pray to God nobody has a fever tomorrow morning and everything go back to work. Well, in addition to that financial hit that she's taking, she's also racking up occurrences or points or red tickets or whatever it is. If you're not at work when you're supposed to work, at a lot of these entry-level and beginning jobs, you get so many occurrences. After 5, you do a 2-day suspension, and after 10, you're terminated. Well, if you're working for me, and I'm a supervisor, and we got mandatory overtime twice a week, you've got to do an extra 2 hours, and one Saturday a month, you've got to do mandatory overtime, and I don't have enough people, and I'm not going to cover your shift, you are not going to get suspended this week, and you're not going to get suspended next month. So they're a lot more forgiving, and it's because they really have to be. And a lot of these policies are kind of set in stone, and for a reason, you don't want the ability for some people for favoritism or for discrimination to creep in. And so when we have a really a surplus of workers, more people tend to lose their jobs.
I just want to add to the story Duke just told
Yeah.
about that worker. The fact that worker might be coming to a community college in addition to everything else you mentioned,
Right, yes.
in order to improve their skills so that they can move to a better occupation, right? That may provide a few more benefits. And so, you know, just to put that into context, I think there's a big emphasis that you're beginning to see in community colleges, including ours, towards ensuring that we're making the appropriate investments towards those sectors of the economy that are growing the most. So when you look at what we've done at City Colleges, we just opened up a TDL center. Yeah, it's truck driving, will increase our capacity fourfold, but it's also diesel mechanic, auto mechanic, supply chain management. We're going to do aeronautical engineering maintenance technicians, right? We've got a whole set of jobs that, you know, before then, on the south side of Chicago, we really only had a liberal arts building that helped students to transfer to four-year universities. Just opened up state-of-the-art manufacturing, advanced manufacturing centers. Same thing, 4 times the capacity. Why? Because we've got employer demand, right? And where those employers can organize themselves better, we can do a heck of a lot better job, right? So that's been our ask, continues to be our ask, right? We're not set up to organize employers. We're set up to respond to employers. There's an effort in Chicago, new effort, P33, to try to position Chicago to, be increasingly a leader in IT, right? And pick a couple of winning areas in IT. And of course, they're looking to us to ensure an inclusive growth strategy that includes Chicagoans in those opportunity points. But without their expertise, right, and without the investments that we're making, we won't be able to make the match to grow our economies. And one thing I think that we have to keep in mind as citizens of this great country and our great cities and rural areas is that we have to grow in an inclusive manner if we're going to have a sustainable society, right? And so when I hear, maximum employment and the trade-offs, right, that you're here making, I want you to be cognizant, right, that is just as important as, that's a risk factor, let me put it that way, that you ought to be taking into account. If people in these communities can't get attached to the economy, right, and the cycle perpetuates itself time and time again, we have an opportunity right now to take advantage of what's going on, to truly make our economies more inclusive and create new pathways that haven't necessarily existed before.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree both with what Duke and Juan said. I do think, the story that Duke told about someone who, in addition to trying to train for a new job, hold a new job down, but has a set of other things that they are trying to manage back at home: childcare, transportation. The job may be nowhere where it is that they live or nowhere near where their children are going to school. To the extent that we've thought about what is a workforce strategy that would help solve some of that problem, we tend to focus on the training aspect of it. We work a lot on the training aspect of it, but we also recognize that we need to have some significant non-training investments and supports, particularly help new workers who have particular challenges at home to make sure that they have a chance to succeed as well. So we work with a number of states around the country who want to be part of this expanding apprenticeship opportunities to new sets of workers and to new industries. But the companies that we talk to in those states say, we want to make sure that they're qualified to walk onto the job site the first day, but we want just as much to make sure that there's a way that we can have that person working with us 18 months, 2 years from now. And so can the state come up with essentially like an apprenticeship or work-based learning support fund where we can actually have some way to fund the childcare and the transportation and the guidance and the other things that will help kind of wrap around what it is that they may have learned either on the job or at the local community college to qualify for that job in the first place. So I think, to answer your question, yes, there's a lot more folks who are walking into jobs now that have not had a chance to do that before. They're working very hard to hang on to those jobs, but we're going to have to do a lot more to keep them onto those jobs a couple of years from now.
Yeah, so I think that gets back to the questions that Jared was raising earlier. So what does it take to pull some of these folks into the labor force, into productive employment, and does that change then the likelihood that they will be in the labor force even through a period when perhaps the economy is a little weaker? Does this have a long-standing change on that community's ability to retain employment and for those families to improve their prospects? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, I'm the union guy, and so I'm going to say that one of the best things that could possibly happen is to have a collective bargaining agreement in place where it addresses things like layoffs. I mean, we've negotiated reduction in force. We know that the economy is going to fluctuate, and sometimes the number you have today is not going to be the number you're going to have in the near future. So how do you do that? Well, if the last people you hire are the people that you have kind of determined are not your first choice, well, they're going to be the first ones gone. And so let's make sure we've got something in place where we're going to offer them some ability to move to part-time, to have the ability to train for anything else, to get something going and to stay in the workforce. Because I'm telling you, once we lose them, it's extremely difficult to get people back. One of the big hits that we take is there's always a desire to recruit and to get people in. And we've been talking about the shortage of workers that we knew was coming for at least 3 years, I think. But we didn't do any training. And we did fire up one program where we were getting some people who had historically been marginalized and getting them in and lined up. And we got them trained and then said, okay, now wait for a couple of months for the weather to break. And you just can't do that. And you get a bad reputation because people feel like they were lied to. And so, you know, that's, in my mind, that's one of the best things that we can do is to determine before the need how we're going to handle something like that.
Most of my students, 80,000 students, are low-wage workers. Okay, not all of them. I would say a small percentage of them would be unionized, low-waged workers. Their ability to have predictable schedules, their ability to have supports from their employers, right, are critical to their ability to upskill. They're already, as I said before, managing life, they're managing work, and they're managing their skill building capabilities. And so one of the wonderful things about the apprenticeship effort is it brings that into line, right? Yeah. It allows all those things to complement each other. Let's think about one of our students who had a 3-month-old daughter, 2 jobs, going to school, you know, slept maybe 3 or 4 hours a night and barely saw his newborn, right? And all of a sudden, he's an apprentice at Aon, one of 48 apprentices. Changes his life entirely. The company supports the work that he's doing. The company supports the education. There's a set of mentorships available. He's graduating and going on. This is a set of people that are out there, right, available for us to begin to meet the big needs. There's one thing that we have as a economy, one thing that is coming at us a lot, okay, and particularly in the areas of specialized trades, if you will, is the number of people that will be retiring. So, you know, we have an emerging cliff of retirees in the skilled trade areas that we're really going to need to address. And so there's many opportunity for points that this economy will help, you know, companies, and I'm going to say, you know, sometimes despite themselves, right? Because, you know, in the absence of the strong economy, they may not actually address the retiree challenge, right? They may forego, you know, for another few years. We've seen this happen before. This is an opportunity point for us to actually get this inclusion of this particular workforce. And when it comes to those folks that are unemployed in our communities, you know, what we're finding as an institution is, you know, the educational pathways that are shorter term, that can get people into occupations quickly and then stack up to degrees are actually good incentive points for folks to tap into some kind of training, because what we know for sure is skills matter. And so, you know, we can't expect folks that are not in the labor force today to actually get in the labor force if they're not working through one of our kinds of institutions to do some level of skill building.
You know, when I think about back to 2009 during the last recession, so, you know, to Duke's point, you know, last hired, first fired. I mean, that certainly was the dynamic that happened. We could have, should have thought about and tried to some extent, but it was too late in the cycle to think about some layoff aversion policies. So how is it that rather than reducing your headcount by 20%, like could we keep 100% of your folks on payroll? Could you have them work 4 days a week? Could we pick up, could the government pick up their wages for 1 day a week and use that time to train them so when the economy comes back, that business line that you never were able to tap into, or that technology that you were never able to bring into the work site, like to have them ready to do that? There are some states that kind of talked about that, but that is something that just in terms of kind of like an intervention into the labor market, working with industry, it was a very hard sell to make. There's a lot of hard sells. I mean, I know there are folks in this room who are trying to do a lot more to increase aggregate demand during those period of time. We couldn't get Congress to cooperate in that as well. But I do think, you know, there is this element, Juan talked about the demographic cliff that a lot of these industries are facing. Like, 10 years ago, I think the median age, I'll probably have these numbers wrong, but I used to hear, like, if I talked to folks in like the public utilities, unionized, whatever, it was the mid-50s. I talked to somebody at DT Energy in Detroit last week. It's now 58. So that is the median age of their workforce. So they're looking at a significant chunk of their skilled workforce that is going to be retiring, and that is true in a lot of these industries. And we have no plan for how it is that we're going to deal with that particular challenge. Most of what we do in the context of recessions is, while we say that we're trying to kind of build the pipeline for the future workforce, we do tend to pay attention more to the folks who had a job who lost it. So we did create some new jobs through the Recovery Act in construction and other areas. We did a pretty decent job of getting skilled construction workers hired off the bench, back off the bench. We did not do a great job of getting the next generation of folks who had not been working in the construction industry to be prepared for when that industry came back. And so here we are again, short construction workers with the building boom that we're currently having. So there's a set of kind of like structural things that are going on underneath the cycle, where folks who are having just as hard a time finding a job in 3% unemployment as they were having when it was 10% unemployment. Things are going to be happening with retirements. The amount of impact that has been projected, and there's a lot of debate about this, but with automation, artificial intelligence, digitalization in the workforce, I don't think that there's going to be nearly as many jobs eliminated as I think some of the early studies seem to indicate. But certainly at least 60% of the jobs in the workforce are going to be impacted significantly. So that's 90 million jobs. So what is the national strategy that we have to reskill some portion of 90 million workers to be able to kind of stay ahead of that technological curve? And that's going to be a challenge regardless of what's going on with the business cycle. And I think that in some ways we pay attention to these issues more, and obviously when we have a high unemployment and there's economic stress. But the future of our economy is really dependent on us figuring this out now and not waiting for that crisis before we recognize that we need to be doing something more on the government side of the equation.
So I think it is useful to think back about the financial crisis and where we are today. We've had 10 years of recovery, and some of the folks that are getting jobs today, or some of the potential workers that employers are looking at, they simply wouldn't have looked at even 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. So the question, I think, that we were asking earlier, how long does an expansion need to go? How strong does the labor market need to get before you bring some of these people who are really on the sidelines and maybe have some challenges, whether it be past incarceration records or drug testing issues, low skills, other kinds of barriers? I think the question is whether it requires this strong a labor market, or whether we have other mechanisms for bringing people back into the labor market more quickly over the course of a recovery.
Yeah, and clearly I can't give you an answer on something like that, but I can tell you from my experience and from the things I've seen, it is, the labor market's really heating up. It's really getting tight, and we're starting to see more and more people in. And I'm seeing, personally, where I live, which is a pretty low cost of living area of the country, we're seeing some wages increasing and competition among people for low wage workers. In addition to the people who are in a union and represented, we also work on minimum wage and organizing fast food workers and trying to help out there. But I talked to a woman who was a teacher, and she taught me a very, very, very valuable lesson. She said, God bless the poor C students. She said, A and B students, they're taken care of. They're fine. They're going to be fine. Don't need anything. They're great. The C students, it wouldn't take much to bump them up to a B and to get them a little bit better life. It really wouldn't. But I've got to focus on the D students, and then maybe every once in a while I'll try to deal with the F students. And so if you look at that, it's kind of like a slinky. You're holding one out, and you got the top of it. We want to move the whole thing. If you pull from the top, it's going to take an awful lot to get the bottom up off the floor. If you can get underneath it and you can move the bottom, it makes it go a lot quicker, a lot better, and you change lives. I mean, you change futures. So you take somebody who doesn't have much, and they're not able to get much, and they're doing the best they can. If you give them just a little bit more, then possibly their children are going to do better. And then the other sad fact of life right now, and I don't know if it's been like this forever, I'm sure this is not just a new recent phenomenon, but now we're seeing where it's typically 3 generations that are dependent upon people, I'm going to say of our age. You've got your immediate family, you've got your parents in a lot of cases, and now we're seeing a lot of people taking care of their grandchildren too. And so how do you stretch that lifetime career that was supposed to take care of 1 generation over 3?
Yeah, I just say, when you think back to that time period, you know, the reality was, you know, layer of stressor upon layer of stressor, right? That was created for working families. And so you go to certain communities in our city where many people were losing their homes, okay? And in a you know, when a family network, when one family member is losing their home, another family member is actually impacted by that reality, right? When somebody's losing a job that's in your family network, you're going to do something about it most of the time, right? And so that happens in lower income communities as well. And so you could imagine the stressors of the downturn in the economy, the stressors of multiple people having lost jobs, you know, the stressors of multiple people losing homes, right? All of those things compounding themselves. And so where we're at right now is that some of those stressors have been eliminated, right? And that gives people a fighting chance to focus a little more on their skill building, to focus a little bit more on, you know, being able to go from where they're at today to where they actually want to be tomorrow. And I think that's the big, there's a psychological, and that's not in every community in Chicago, right? We still have so many communities that are, you know, left out of the economy, period, that need to be addressed. But by and large, you know, we continue to see this as an opportunity point, and that's why we're making the investments that we need to make. But this is really important. We need a partner. The private sector needs to be a partner for the long run, not for the short run. You talked about beyond the business cycle, right? We can't have you come, you know, and then go away when things get better for you. You got to stay the course, right? So that we as education institutions can be there for the private sector through the cycles, you know. And I don't know what the Fed can do about that, but you know, there's an important voice, right, that can be shared. Because sometimes, quite frankly, we'll see that in education, engagement and disengagement. It's not consistent. And predictability, certainty, it's important to you in business. It's important to us in education too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think. You know, I completely agree that in terms of how we think that industry needs to be a bigger part of the solution. I know that there's been a lot of critique. World Economic Forum at the last Davos conference did a study looking at a certain set of occupations in the U.S. that were going to be largely impacted by automation or technology. And what was the private sector ready to do to be able to help solve some of that problem? And for the jobs that they looked at, they said it was going to be about a $34 billion price tag over 10 years. And the headline from the report was that industry was willing to cover about 20% of that cost, right? So to the ear, most folks are like, why is industry only ready to cover 20% of the cost? And we can argue about why it is that they need to be investing more. But the part that got missed from that study was they said, you know, but if the U.S. didn't try to solve this on a firm-by-firm basis, if they try to, you know, as other countries do, solve this by a sector or industry basis, where we took that public-private resource and kind of got some economies of scale, and they were created, you know, common shared training programs, working with a common partner like a labor union or intermediate, whatever. That same investment could cover 50% of the cost. Well, there you go. Now you've got like a public-private partnership, right? If we could do a better job with a set of policies that would make it easier for industry to maximize its investment by working collectively with each other, then we've got a bigger part of the problem solved by the private dollar that we can bring a matching set of public dollars in. So I think that even as individual firms, we have good firms and bad firms in every industry, and every firm could be doing more. But I think we also need to look at what our industrial labor policy looks like or doesn't look like in this country if we're actually going to figure out how to make the best use of private dollars the way other competing countries do.
So we've heard a lot. We saw a nice little article earlier about just how much employers are willing to look the other way when they are hiring because the job market is that strong. We haven't heard as much about what workers are able to ask for in terms of compensation, whether that be wages or benefits, and how that might have changed over the course of the last few years as the labor market has grown noticeably stronger.
So as you know, it's been very, very difficult to get wage increases. We're just now recently seeing some increases and some stuff creep up because of the competition, and it's really, really fierce. There's a new company that's offering $22 an hour because they know their competitors at $20 an hour, and so they can poach trained workers and get them in the door and ready to go. So there's a little bit going on there, but I think that kind of the lag that we saw when we were seeing the start of this, where there was a decrease in the supply of workers, but we didn't, or increase in demand, and we didn't see an increase in wages. I think part of that has to do with all of the other costs to an employee. An employer has to pay for that employee. So of course, one is healthcare, and we consistently see healthcare rising. And so when we are negotiating a contract, the employers always want the employees to pick up a bigger piece of the insurance cost. In addition to that, there's a couple others that I don't think have gotten as much press as that. One is the pension liability for defined benefit pension plans. That has got to be addressed, and if we're going to start putting money into that, that money's got to come from somewhere. And then one of the other things that it just seems to me has got to be driving this conversation a little bit is that if you run a business that requires 25 workers to operate on a day, and you've got 32, so that people who are not there and vacation and in time off and everything, you can cover it, you can continue to go along. But if all of a sudden you're at running minimum or slightly less than minimum, and somebody takes a vacation, you have to hire time and a half, you have to hire somebody to cover that shift and to come in and take care of that, or you lose production. And so is that a cost to the employer where we might be leaking wages out where we could get? I don't know. But without a doubt, we've got to start seeing some increases in that so we can continue to move along.
I just believe we've got to do more with public policy on this regard. It's that simple. I mean, we're in a city that, the mayor worked with the business community, the prior mayor, Mayor Emanuel, to get, we're now at $12 an hour for minimum wage. It escalates up over time, 13, 14. We have a new governor that's basically set a marker for $15 an hour across our state, right? This is the kind of thing, and when you think about our students, that's a big benefit to our students. Even though our tuition's only $1,752 for a semester, they have so many other bills, that their ability to pay into their increased skill building is extremely, extremely limited. And so this morning, our new mayor, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, was at the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce and, being celebrated and sharing her support for the business community, but also, putting a clear marker down that predictable scheduling makes a difference. Makes a difference to working families. How can you raise your children? And actually, deliver for your employer on a consistent basis without it. And so I think there needs to be, and she invited the business community to a table where we can figure this out together, right? And I think the approach has to be collaborative, but it has to move the needle on things that we know have been important to our lives as professionals and workers, that are important to any worker's life. And so when I think about that, I think, there's absolutely a role for the labor movement. The labor movement has actually been leading on this issue. And as a result, you get opportunity that spills over to lots of other workers that may not be in the labor unions themselves. And I do hope that we embrace opportunities to increase the wages of working people.
Juan, are the graduates from your school mostly going in at sort of entry-level wages? And do they see rapid increases right now, more rapid than they might have 5 years ago?
When it comes to our students, yeah, when they're entering in, so I focus on their reality as sort of low-wage workers, but the reality is what we've built is a pipeline for them to be able to really jump up from that, because they're in high-demand occupations, right? So when our graduates are getting into the healthcare fields, when they're getting into advanced manufacturing, and with the most modern equipment and tools and technology, when they're getting into the supply chain management and the IT fields, obviously they're starting to see wage progression for themselves. But there's a difference between what's happening in the high demand occupations, right, and what's happening in general, right, in the marketplace, and both of those things coming together. And so, from our perspective, right, there's actually many cases our students are filling positions that didn't exist before, like in IT, okay, but they're also filling positions in manufacturing that are being held by folks that make substantially more than what our students are coming in commanding, right? And so overall, if you think about the economy, if we do a really good job of replacing those retiring workers with skilled workers from institutions like ours, we may not see a whole lot of net wage growth, as a result of this, right? Which could help with, inflationary pressures. And if we don't take advantage of this opportunity, then, we might be staring at, a cliff in terms of skills. I know there's a lot of companies that already are.
Andy, I don't know if you want to talk about that or the compositional kinds of issues that Juan is talking about.
Well, just to follow up on, yes, short of a collective bargaining agreement, if an individual is going to decide whether or not to go to their boss and ask for a wage increase, they're probably going to make a pretty clear assessment first about whether or not this is really the company that I want to stay in, that whether I have a future. So obviously wages and benefits are a concern if they're looking for a wage increase. But they're like, are they going to invest in me? Am I going to have a chance to advance over time? And in a tight labor market, if they think that that's not the case, they probably can find that same job at least the same wage and maybe at a better wage somewhere else. And so that is where you see a lot of kind of the quits and folks going over to other companies. But longer term, yes, thank goodness that we've raised the floor on a lot of jobs through minimum wage, at least within certain states and cities. I think there has been some question about whether or not, as we think, as public investors in the skills of private sector workers, even if they may not be working in the private sector yet, should we be setting some kind of wage standards? And there's been a lot of debate about this back and forth within the workforce development community. My experience has been, so before I founded National Skills Coalition, I was doing some work in the long-term care industry. One of those low-wage, high-turnover, no benefit, sometimes having to work for 2 or 3 different employers just to kind of make what amounts to a relatively low full-time wage. But there were good firms in that industry, and there were bad firms in that industry. And there's some that paid higher and provided benefits, and some that did not. But there were decisions that were made, at least in the city where I was working at the time, was, well, we're just not going to train people for those healthcare jobs, right? Like those are lousy jobs, they're high turnover. So we'll train folks for manufacturing jobs, we'll train them for construction jobs. And what that did is that cut out a lot of low-income women of color who were primarily the workforce in that industry, who did not get an opportunity, therefore, to get some kind of support, at least to get that job, maybe at a firm that would give them a chance to advance over time. So I think there's this back and forth about what is the leverage that government policy can have when it's thinking about investing in workers, that we can expect more, at least target where it is that we're thinking about placing them, but to not do it in a way that's ruling out a lot of places where there still are a lot of low-income folks who are finding employment in those positions, if it's at a good firm where they have a chance to advance.
Duke, did you want to come back?
No, I'm good with that one.
Okay. So we talked a little bit earlier about quits being a good indicator of how confident people are that there are really good job opportunities out there and they can secure better wages or more security elsewhere. What about that kind of movement? Are you seeing people feeling more confident that they can look for different jobs? Or are they still so insecure about the jobs that they've recently gotten and the wages that they've recently secured that you're not seeing that kind of movement on some of the job groups that you work most with?
So on the more towards the entry level or low end, the majority of them are trying to get enough time in so that when there is a downturn, they're not going to be in the first wave to go. And so there's kind of a disincentive to switch and jump to someplace new right now if you think you might be in that boat. The other thing is that with the most at-risk and vulnerable groups that need it the most, they're the first ones to give up at no. And so if you go to another employer and you say, hey, I want to come work for you, but I want $16 an hour, or I want $12 an hour, no, we pay 11, same as the place you're at. Well, I'm done. We're going for a raise. And so it is, I've seen some people who have, I'm going to say accidentally found a job looking for a way to supplement their income. With a part-time job, they found another job that turned out to be a full-time job because the employer was desperate for somebody to go there.
We're seeing a lot more career changers too.
You are.
Coming in, yeah, including more folks with bachelor's degrees that are seeking out, skilled occupations. I think of a woman that's at Accenture right now who actually was an architect and now is in an IT occupation, right? And a couple of folks, this is anecdotal, but it's sort of the norm nowadays that you have many people that are looking to make a career change, sometimes for greater stability, but also for greater fit, right? So you have both of those things happening, and that's a sign of confidence, right, in the marketplace, that you're going to take advantage of this opportunity to find something that's a little closer fit to what you really wanted to do, even if you have a BA or you've got a job, that kind of thing.
I think this is a dynamic that we really should be paying attention to, because if you have a lot of folks who spent a lot of money and took on a lot of debt to get a bachelor's degree, and then they're going back to city colleges in Chicago because they figured out their economic future is probably going to be better by getting something at the city college. I mean, that should tell us one thing about kind of like where our higher education policies are and are not aligning with the labor market. It also should make us concerned about the fact that for every person with a bachelor's degree who's enrolling at the city college, unless we're providing City College with more resources, it's taking up a spot where somebody else for whom the City College might be the first place is not going to have an opportunity. So we need to be thinking about our higher ed systems, community colleges, city colleges, and others in a much more expansive way. It's not just the way that folks are getting their first job, but it's how folks are retraining over time. And our higher education policies are not set up to do that. So even if we want, something that there's now bipartisan support for, a lot of support from the business community, a lot of support from a range of folks that we work with, is could we even make Pell Grants, so income-based tuition aid at the federal level, available to people who want to take one of those shorter-term courses that Juan was talking about, one that somebody can take while they're holding down a job. They can take the course at night. It may be shorter than what might be the required 600 hours of seat time that's currently required under the Pell Grant program. As a way it is that we are making it easier to get more people onto the community college campus to continue to retrain. Like we haven't set up our higher education system to operate that way. So a lot of folks are doing that by paying out of pocket, going into further debt themselves, or maybe they found somebody else who's willing to support some of that work. But those are the ways that we need to rethink the higher ed system, because otherwise we're going to have many more already trained people going back in to portions of the post-secondary system, and we're going to be crowding out the people who need that even just for their first step into the skilled labor market.
So I think you've been listening to the various panels today, and you're familiar that we as policymakers have a very clearly defined two goals that were given to us by Congress: price stability, so stable and moderate inflation on the one hand, and something that is termed maximum employment on the other hand. And we also are very cognizant of financial stability. How would you, given your experience of the labor market and your kind of observations over this recovery, how would you counsel us to be balancing those two goals?
This sounds like a trick question. But from my perspective, it's pretty easy. Now, you have to understand my perspective. A lot of it comes from today. And Professor Abraham earlier was talking about the unemployment number, and it's difficult to measure and how hard it is. Okay, first of all, I don't want to be impersonating an economist up here. I'm not going to confuse my Google search with your PhD. But, so it's very difficult to measure. And so in such, that should probably be where you focus the most energy, because you have a target for the other one. Whether it's right or wrong or needs to be changed, I mean, at least you have a target. This one, there's not even a number with it yet that I know of. But then the second thing that I point to, and again, this is where I come from, and it's a jobs kind of thing. So in 1981, I had a friend who bought a house. He paid 18% interest on it when he signed it. And so I talked to him, I was like, that's really, really high. He had a plan. Okay, so here's the plan. He was a construction worker, and he was tired of being laid off, so he had trained to drive a truck. His wife was working. They both had jobs, and they had a kid on the way. And 18% interest is high, but something my father told me years ago is rent is 100% interest. And so 18 is less than 100. Do it, refinance it, get it down, and go. And so while I care about the interest rate, I really do, I really care about my paycheck more than that. And so, again.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't think I have to say any more. Look, my father was a steel worker, and he'd always say, son, the most thing I need more than anything is a good job, right? That pays me well, right? And so I think there's a lot of people in America that, could be helped by having a good job, okay? And the more jobs we can create, right, the better off we're going to be. Are we not concerned? Am I not concerned at all with inflation? Well, I'm trying to understand where the concern's coming from right now, because it's not like wages are growing, at a rate that should have us super concerned. Wages are not growing, right? And so, at least, from my perspective, right, they're not growing as much as they, can and should be growing. And so, and then we have this retiree thing going on over here, right? That is not insignificant, right, to, the long-term, viability of our economy and competitiveness. And so I think that, we should really think long and hard, before we start, slowing down the progress that we're making as a nation.
Yeah, of course. I think maximum employment and measuring it in a way that really is taking into account both the folks who are considered to be in the labor market and the folks that are outside or on the margins of the labor market. To Jared's point, the benefits that brings to a range of folks that currently are not benefiting from a very strong economy, that's where it is that we should be starting. I understand that there's other things that you all have to balance in that, but that's my job, and I think that that's where most of the folks that we talk to, that's where they would put their first priority.
So I have another question that will refer to a panel that we're going to have in a few minutes, which is how the Federal Reserve interacts with communities around the country and how we communicate. And you're, the three of you, very familiar with the Federal Reserve, but a lot of the folks that you work with may not be. So just any words of advice that you would have for us in terms of how we communicate and how what we do is better connected to some of the communities and the folks that you interact with day to day.
So I think all in, you do a great job, but there's probably some room for improvement. But a part of that falls on kind of the rest of us. there was Your Money, Your Goals that was published and put out and sent out. And we got that out and we pushed that out to a lot of the unions and a lot of the apprenticeship programs and a lot of the places where we try to recruit some low-income, entry-level workers to come in and try to get them into the workforce to be able to say, look, you're going to make some money, but you're going to need to save and you're going to need to think about this, and don't go out and buy a car once you get yourself in debt. That you need to have a plan. You need to understand how all of these things work. And so I think that the messages are there and that those programs are there, but I don't really have an answer for it.
That's helpful. Thank you.
There's a layer of leadership that is, I just think about my city, right? There's a layer of leadership that is critical to this city that is not tuned into this conversation. And I appreciate the invitation, Chair Powell, and the work that you all are doing to create this conversation. There may be opportunities to, bring in other layers of leadership, because whatever decisions you make in the future, it's better that they be generally more understood, by a layer of leadership in civil society than less understood, right? And to the degree that, that can happen in some way, shape, or form, I think that could be very beneficial, right, to the Federal Reserve's, also to your voice, as you go out into the world and, try to influence the direction of consumers and investors and the economy. And certainly we'd be willing to do whatever we could at City Colleges of Chicago to contribute in that effort.
Andy.
Yeah, we've had the pleasure of working with a number of the regional feds, which I think have been, and perhaps because they're a little bit closer to the ground, I think have been really valuable partners as conveners, as providing some research, and just some level of kind of legitimacy to the kinds of issues that we're talking about today. So we've done a lot of work with the Atlanta Fed. Folks probably know that they helped compile and edit this large 3-book piece on workforce issues. I have not read it from cover to cover, but I read my chapter. That part I did. But they have been a great, we convened a set of southern states in Atlanta at the Fed to talk about what each of them could be doing as a region to think about some of these workforce issues. They just co-hosted an event with a set of Midwest states over at the Detroit Fed. There might have been some folks from the Chicago Fed who were involved in that as well. The St. Louis Fed was involved in the Atlanta meeting. Philadelphia Fed, I know, has done. So they've been great partners. I've been on and off. I've had conversations with staff at the Board of Governors over the years. This, to me, feels like something at a different level. And so I want to congratulate folks for kind of thinking about where it is at the national level. The Federal Reserve could be a stronger voice on some of these issues, because we do need it. You bring a legitimacy to the conversation that I think really adds to those of us who've kind of been working in the trenches for years to try to solve these problems on the ground, and recognize that we're never going to get there without a rethink of our national workforce, higher ed, adult ed policies. And so having you as a partner in that would be incredibly useful moving forward.
Okay. Duke.
Yeah, and I do have to give a shout out to President Esther George and the efforts that she has made. Years ago, she convened a group of community leaders and labor and employment advocates in Kansas City to have difficult discussions about what was actually going on with the economy at the time and how to best move forward, how to best communicate. There's so much noise out there right now in the media. There's so much just angry people screaming at each other. And it's nice to have people from the 10th who are able to, cut through and tell you the facts and the reason that things are actually happening when we reach out. Because this is one of the most important things for me, not understanding exactly how all of this works. Say, hey, what is this? It's like, you were being lied to, don't worry about it. I'm like, okay, got it, I can understand that.
All right, well, I really appreciate all of the insights and your willingness to share them with us here today, and to kind of ground our discussions in the reality of the economy in a way that's much more concrete. So thank you very much, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for a very productive session and many great insights. We've come to another break, so there's coffee outside the room, and the conference will resume at 4:30. Thank you.